Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Byrgenwerth. And brought forbidden blood back with him to Cainhurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman vile bloods was born. The vile bloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the Church's blood healing.
Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Bloodborne No Healing walkthrough, and this is my favourite location in the game. This is the Forsaken Castle Cainhurst, and I'm not going to be entertaining these bloodsuckers too much. I'm not going to be doing too much with those guys because I've never been a big fan of them. I think the DLC did wonders for them to make them a bit more interesting to fight, but those particular dudes I have no sympathy for and generally avoid. And you'll notice I'm going to be doing a pretty full throttle run through of the castle, even though I do think it's a wonderful place. And it brings me back to the design conversation that I have in almost every Souls game, which is this idea of brevity. If your level outstays its welcome, it generally leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. But if your level isn't quite long enough and it makes everyone who plays it wish for more, it's probably the better solution to that situation, even though I wish there was more to the castle in this game. I always do. Every single time, from Demons to Dark Souls to Bloodborne, whenever I'm inside some kind of castle area, I always want there to be more ramparts, you know, more quarters, more areas of the castle. I just want the castle to keep going on and on and on, because there's just something about that kind of level design that I really enjoy. And you don't get it in a lot of these games, but at the same time, if you did, do you think I would like it as much? Because I might grow to dislike it. It's that weird thing, isn't it? We always want what we can't have. The grass is always greener on the other side. Insert adage or idiom or whatever you want to use. But it's just that thing, you know. The moment you lend a game to a friend, you want to play that game. It's just a strange personality trait that some people have. Maybe not all of us, but I know I certainly do. As we come up against the rather dangerous rapier man here. Do not underestimate Mr. Pipe Dagger Man. He's not cool. But the good news is you can knock him over with your pistol and you can proceed to attack him on wake up, which is real cool. If he does his combo, it is long, it has great reach, and it does good damage. They're one of those enemies that I can't remember the guy. Was it Tanimura-san from Dark Souls 2? Where he's like, we never want any enemy in our game to be tougher than it looks. Oh, that dude really did not understand this series, did he? Can you name a Soul game that doesn't have enemies in it that are tougher than they look? Like, that's the design ethos of a lot of enemies. They look pretty. They lack sophistication. They don't necessarily look that lethal, and then you're dead, and you don't know why. That's what these games do. And this dude is a massive example of an enemy that can shit stain you before you realise what you've done wrong, just because of how they function. And there's so many enemies in Dark Souls 2 that do that too. Like, look at that bug that's in the gutter that does nothing except for maybe passively poison you. That is an enemy that looked absolutely terrifying, and it was nothing. It did absolutely nothing. It was as useful as, you know, a fart in a vacuum. It did nothing. Yet there is creatures in that game that shouldn't do anything, should be just a normal popcorn enemy. There are more dangerous than some bosses. And I'm looking at you, scrubber in your little leotard in the gutter with your dagger that's covered in darkness. And it's not a dagger, it's a broken straight sword, one of the weakest weapons in the game, that for some reason takes off 60% of your life. And it's the same scrubber you've been killing since the very beginning of the game. Yet, those ones are just real angry at the world. But we're fighting the Children of Antiquity. That's the name of this character that we're currently killing. They are one of the only creatures in the game that will drop bloodstone chunks, but it is a very rare drop. I think it's a 2% chance to drop it. Back in the early days of Bloodborne, you were able to jump over the wall at the very beginning and then get immediately to the Forbidden Woods. From there you could take the invitation to Cainhurst, come here, and you could actually farm the bloodstone chunks before even beating Gascoigne. And it made it really useful for players who wanted to get those early resources pretty quickly and do some damage. However, they patched that out, so now the soonest you can probably get the bloodstone chunks is via the DLC or by going into the Chalice dungeons, which, depending on your build and your experience with the game, will dictate how difficult that is for you. And one aspect of this particular level that I've never really liked is how these big tables seemingly cannot be broken. And it leads to some situations where you can get pincered in and put in corners by the ghosts. All kinds of clipping nightmares. And it makes sense. It's one of those things where it does make a lot of sense, but it would have been really nice if we could break them. Because there's something cool about, you know, really needing to pull out a victory, having your back against a wall, and then destroying the environment and realizing you could have got away the entire time. The good news about the Souls games, and as an extension, Bloodborne, if you see something blocking your way, at least you saw it. And I think I respect that a lot. Because I was playing Yakuza earlier this week, and I went to run around the back of a desk to get away from a boss. It was at least 5 to 6 feet worth of space around the back of this desk, and it was just a massive invisible wall. And I ended up getting hit by the boss because I didn't realise that's how that worked. Whereas in a game such as this, if you can't go somewhere, there's usually a geography reason. It's not just, well, you can't go there, so we're going to put an invisible wall there, which I've always found to be a necessity in games, but also misleading at times. But what we're going to be doing now, guys, is we're going to move on to this rooftop. There's a couple of more children up here if you want to kill them to try and get that rare drop. I'm not going to mess with them. I'm going to go straight for Martyr Ligarius, who I think Martyr's one of the better boss fights in the game. I think he is interesting, he's aggressive, he's got a pattern that is really exciting if you can get a fun one. But because of the awful run back, he's one of the bosses I have the least experience with, because I hate running back to him. And that is 100% my grievance towards this series. You might love that, I don't. So when I fight this dude, it's usually messy or I chain backstab him. And the great thing about this boss is in that second phase, when he starts going absolutely nuts, he can do jump attacks that can be chain stabbed. And if he keeps repeating it, which he normally does, you can just roll out of the way and backstab him again. And if you have the Augur of Ebrietas, you can backstab him even better, because that now backstabs people. Incredibly useful tool. But in this first phase, he's going to do two things. He's going to charge that big aimed ball towards you, or he's going to run away, casting these skulls at you which explode. If you dodge, you can generally get through them, get away from them, but if you dodge into them, you can take some pretty big damage here. On this particular attack, it's dishonest. Wherever he stabs the staff into the ground, and the direction he is facing is not the direction that that energy ball will travel. Regardless of his stance, that energy will travel towards you, so you can't squeeze as much damage out of that attack as I wish you could, because you can sometimes take a lot of quick damage from it. But what is happening here is we've got Ligarius into a melee-minded attack, so he's going to start swinging his sword, he's going to start doing the melee combos, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm not too familiar with his two-handed pattern, because I generally kill him too quick to see too much of this. The only thing to be aware of is if he gets really melee-minded, he's going to come for your blood really quickly, as you see now. Normally, he'll stab it in the ground, but he's just gone balls to the wall, swinging his face off, and this is really rare. The good news is, if you get this pattern, you can do massive damage to him, and just kind of chain your parries like you see me doing here, and you can have this guy dead really fast. I have no idea why he chose to fight me this way, but I love it because it's my favourite kind of encounter, and I wish Ligarius was in the Chalice dungeons, because then I could practice him without the run back. I wish, you know, good old Gascoigne was in the Chalice dungeons, then I could practice him without run back, but he's not. Can you give me a compelling reason why certain bosses are in the chalices and certain bosses aren't? Because I honestly cannot think of a single valid reason why they would not have some of the best bosses in this game in those dungeons. It seems like a very strange choice. But now that we have the Crown of Illusions, it enables us to open up this part of the castle, and we can go and be introduced to some royalty. Cainhurst is such a beautiful zone. I just wish they'd used it a bit more. A little bit like Byrgenwerth. Byrgenwerth has so much potential, and then it really didn't do anything interesting, and I have absolutely no idea why. I've analysed it in my mind a few times, and I guess I've gone over what I think it could be, but I just can't come to any kind of consensus of how they can have these awesome places and then not really do much with them, because I don't think this game was rushed. I don't think it was. And because it's lacking in certain areas like the weapons and the movesets and the depth of the RPG-ness that you got in your Souls games, you know, what's the excuse? Did they put all that time and effort into the Chalice dungeons? And if so, is it another reason to dislike the Chalices? I honestly couldn't tell you, folks, but thank you very much for watching, and you take care now.